Pleasure, I could stay on. I am Pius Kojo Baka. Let's move on to our very first story. And banks have a maximum of 4 years ending 2025 to restore their minimum paid up capital. That's according to the Bank of Ghana. Well, this is as a result of capital shortfall arising solely from the 3D conjunction losses. There is more in this report.
According to the Bank of Ghana, derecognition losses emanating from the domestic debt exchange program will be spread equally over a period of 4 years, effective 2022, for the purposes of capital adequacy ratio computation. The International Financial Reporting Standards states that derecognition refers to the removal of an asset or liability from an entity's balance sheet. Due to the impact of the DDEP on the banks, the Bank of Ghana announced some policy and regulatory reliefs for banks that fully participated in a debt exchange to reduce the effect on their operations. These policy and regulatory reliefs were informed by stress tests on banks that reviewed the potential impact of the exchange on banks' solvency, liquidity, and profitability. Meanwhile, information reaching Joy Business indicates that the banks recorded more than 10 billion cedis loss in 2022. This is as a result of the impact of the DDEP on their operations. The Bank of Ghana, in its January monetary policy report, said banks operating in Ghana wrote off about 5.9 billion cedis as bad debt in December 2022. However, this was initially underestimated.
All right, so joining us via Zoom for his perspective is Senior Finance Lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School, Dr. Benjamin Amoah. Dr. Amoah, grateful you could join me on Business Live. Now, first off, what do you make of this directive, and especially when the Bank of Ghana is attributing the capital shortfall to derecognition losses? Help us understand why.
Yeah, again, it is simply the reflection of what has happened in the economy over the past, year or so, and the fact that these banks also operate within the economy. So whatever happens in the bigger economy will definitely reflect on the performance of the banks and to a large extent on the balance sheets of these banks. So it is not surprising that the banks are reporting some of this bad performance for this particular year. Maybe hopefully even next year, because we are still not at the end of this challenge that we currently face.
In your view, do you think that banks are in the capacity to shore up their capital following the domestic debt exchange program?
But banks will have to, because even before the domestic debt exchange program, if you look at the exchange rates and the way the exchange rate has really, been highly unstable and very weak for the CD, you can clearly look at the fact that in 2018, the recapitalization of 400 million was in an equivalent of about $83 million. As we speak now, if you just do a one-on-one match of the US dollar against the 400 million that we are currently operating with, it's about $40 million. Clearly, without domestic debt exchange program, there will have been the need to do some form of recapitalization. This has been worsened by the domestic debt exchange program. Why? Because most of the banks heavily invested in government instruments which have not performed as predicted, and that has, reflected in some of the losses that the banks are reporting, which will have to be absorbed by the capital of these banks. So clearly, the domestic debt exchange program has a role to play. Nonetheless, the major economy that we are confronted with, if you look at it through the exchange rate condition and situation, you can clearly see that there is about high time that the central bank will call for some form of the need to shore up capital from the owners of the banks.
I'm trying to wonder what would be the implication for banks that are not able to meet the 2025 deadline.
I believe the Bank of Ghana will have a roadmap and a way out for banks. We have gone through a similar situation in the past where there was a clear path for domestic banks, where there was a need to increase bank capital some time ago in the past. The domestic banks were given some time to recapitalize or to increase their capital, whilst the foreign banks were also given another route to use to increase their capital. So clearly, I believe strongly that BOG will be in discussions with these banks that may have some difficulties, and these banks have to present a recapitalization plan to the central bank. And if the central bank is satisfied with the recapitalization plan, I believe clearly the central bank will agree and then make sure that these banks do not simply go down the water as a result of not bad banking, but simply because of the need to recapitalize.
We are indeed grateful, Dr. Benjamin Amoah, for your time. He is a senior finance lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School, helping us appreciate what the directive by the Bank of Ghana.